there it is. All right. So, hi everyone again. Like I mentioned earlier, my name is Sonia Oxlorn. I'm an NYCMER trustee at large. I've been on the board for, I think this is my fourth year on the board. I've also been part of the conference planning committee for many years. I am also in my paid work. I'm the New York City History Day coordinator at the Center for Brooklyn History, which is part of the Brooklyn Public Library. We're fairly new, so if you haven't heard of us, we're the archival branch of the Brooklyn Public Library. And I will definitely talk about History Day later because we're right in the middle of History Day season. So I'll get into that in a moment. But this is my email. Feel free to reach out. This conversation does not need to end today. I'm always open to, having conversations, meeting up with people, whatever it is, or, connecting you with people who might be helpful. If you all would like, I would love to know who you are. I'm trying to see how many of us are here right now. There's 16 of us. If you feel comfortable and would like to share out your name and where you work and maybe why you're joining us today, that would be great. You don't have to, of course. Does anyone want to start? No one, you can also put in the chat if you'd rather.
I can start. Hi, everybody. My name is Margaret. My pronouns are she, her. I work as a manager of school residencies at the American Museum of Natural History. I'm here because I work with scope and sequence a lot, and I find that it's not always indicative of what's happening on the ground in schools. So just, yeah, want to dig in a little bit.
Isabella.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. My name is Isabella Iannoni. I'm the school programs coordinator at Wave Hill. We're a public garden in the Northwest Bronx. And I'm here because scope and sequence kind of scares me sometimes, I think. I'll be honest. And it's something that I have been trying to understand, but also reflect on as like when I'm in schools or when schools come to me, and especially with relating to what teachers need and what teachers want to see for outdoor education purposes.
Mhm.
I'll
Hi.
go. Oh,
Please.
I'm Christopher Dean. I'm the Education and Visitor Experience Manager at the Seaport Museum, and I'll just ditto exactly what Isabella said.
I'm Corinne Candelaria. She, her. I work with Turnstile Tours. I manage all the educational programs for different historic sites around the city. So we do the programs for Brooklyn Navy Yard and for Prospect Park and Brooklyn Army Terminal. So there's a lot of different types of content that I have to figure out how to cover. So looking forward to it today. Thank you.
I can go. Hi, my name is Kristen Olson. Pronouns are she, her. I work at the Natural History Museum, managing the curriculum for the pre-K to fifth grade, and we do a lot of work with scope and sequence, and it's something that I'm just always wanting to learn more about. So I'm excited to be part of this group to talk about it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma. I use she, her pronouns, coming to you from the Art Institute of Chicago. And I'm one of the K-12 student experience educators. So leading tours with students and then writing lesson plans for our team to work with. Kind of I'm a pool of objects. And I think scope and sequence and like curriculum standards are something that I have a vague understanding of, but I'm hoping to uh, get a little bit more concrete with as I continue. So excited to learn from you all.
Heidi, I see your hands up.
Hey everybody, I'm actually zooming in from Atlanta, Georgia, but I'm always game to hop on a free webinar. And I'm the public programs coordinator at Burbank Museum of Natural History. So I help not only with public programs, but also school programs. And I'm trying to bring in more of our homeschoolers for public programs as well. So I'm trying to fit it into um, our scope and sequence. So looking forward to it.
Neat. And we've gotten a couple of people introduced in the chat. Anyone else? Okay, great. Thank you all for sharing. I completely agree with what so many of you said. Like, it's overwhelming. It's not necessarily what we see reflected in our classrooms. So like, what is it? How do we use it? We're going to get into that today. So I'm going to talk a little bit now, but feel free to like raise a hand, put something in the chat. I love being interrupted. It's great. When we're talking about scope and sequence, in the most basic terms, we're kind of saying, scope is like what you're learning, right? So it's goals, it can be subject matter, it can be skills, and then sequence is order, right? It's when it's happening. This can be very similar to what we see just in any given lesson plan, right? Any good lesson plan will have both the content and then also when we're going to do everything. But scope and sequence is looking a little bit larger. So usually when we're talking about scope and sequence, we're talking about something that's sort of laid out by like a larger governing body. So every state has different scope and sequence. New York City has its own scope and sequence. Then New York State also has theirs. Sometimes those are the same. Sometimes those are not the same. It can be a lot. So today we're going to be focusing mostly on New York City. But a lot of this, we're just kind of using that as a starting point, but really a quick Google search for whatever state you're in, whatever city you're in will give you, your particular scope and sequence. So I will start by apologizing for this slide. When I put those question marks up, I didn't realize they moved, and I hate that they move. So I'm so sorry about that. Scope and sequence can also be called many things, which kind of adds to the confusion of when you're like Googling to find them. These are some of the terms I've seen. So scope and sequence, core curriculum, blueprint for learning, blueprint for education, learning standards. Within New York City, we see all of these. And it's, we have one Department of Education, but depending on the subject matter, you're going to see a different name. Why that is, I don't really know. I would love it if they were all just in one website with one title, but that's not what we have to work with. So my guess is that depending on the curriculum, they're sort of buying them from different people and using whatever their terminology is. So one place to look, like I said, a Google search is going to be your best bet. In New York City, there's a website called weteachnyc.org that has lots of learning resources. Most of the scope and sequence will be on there, but not all of them. And again, they might be called different things, so they're kind of hard to search for like on that site specifically. So I did kind of make a sheet. I don't know how to get to that without. Let's see if I can find that for you. Maybe not. Maybe I have to just stop sharing for a minute. Okay. So I will throw this link in the chat. And I will then share my screen again. So this is just a quick little page that has some of the main ones for New York City on it. All of these are clickable links. We have science at the top, social studies, teaching visual arts, and then the bottom one is English language arts and math. So again, we're seeing, for visual arts, it's called Blueprint. For ELA, it's called Common Core. For science, it's called scope and sequence. I don't know why, but that's just how it goes. So depending on who you're working with, where you work, you might want a different one of these. Today, I'm gonna mostly be using ELA, just so that we all have kind of a common ground to look at, but definitely take a look at, some of the other ones that are maybe more helpful to you. So if we go to the website, this is the ELA one, or the ELA and the math standards. Click on English Language Arts. We got a website like this. On the side, you'll see kindergarten to grade 12. We have reading, we have informational text, foundational skills, writing, speaking and listening, right? All these different things. Then it breaks it down into different grades, history, social studies, all these different kind of places. So if we go to literature, let's say 6th grade, we got these like long series of numbers that don't make sense. But when we go and actually look at what each of those things say, it starts to kind of make a little bit more sense. So 6th grade, they basically want 6th graders to be able to cite textual evidence and support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. So I'm looking at this first one. Right, that's a standard that, yes, a 6th grader should be able to use text to support as evidence. I think for us as museum educators, right, we can think of text in a much larger context. So maybe text is text, maybe text is a work of art or an object, or maybe it's an experiment, right? We can see lots of different ways. And I think even though this is specifically talking about literacy, across the board, students should be able to look at one thing and use it as evidence for something else, whether it's science or math or English, or art or whatever other subject you're looking at. It's the same skill. And so as museum educators, we get to play with these a little bit more, and we don't have to, take them quite as rigidly. But it's a good way to kind of look at this and say, like, okay, I'm working with 6th graders. Am I doing what 6th graders need? And I heard when we were doing introductions, a lot of people saying, like, what we see in these standards is not necessarily what we're seeing in classrooms. I think of these as like a guideline, right? They're not necessarily what is happening. They are, every class is different, every teacher is different, every student is different. And so what one 6th grade class level is not what another 6th grade class level is. And our jobs is to be super adaptable, right? And I think as museum educators, we're all good at that. We're all, good at looking at a class and saying, like, all right, they're not what my 6th graders yesterday were like. This is a very different group of 6th graders. Maybe they're more on a 5th grade level, or maybe they're more on a 8th grade level. But this kind of is like a place to start. It's not where you end. So this is like an example of what one of them look like. We can take a look at, science. Oops. Where did it go? Here it is. So this is on that weteachnyc.org website. It looks like this. We can take a look, let's say, at pre-K through 8. Makes us click a lot of buttons before it'll open. This one is specifically to New York City. So that first one we looked at is actually nationwide. Not every state uses it, but many do. This one is specific to New York City. New York City will have certain standards that align with what the state says, but there's going to be maybe slightly different or additional to the state. So there's a state board of ed, there is the city Department of Education. They all have their standards. So again, as museum educators, we're not in the classroom. We get to pick what we use. So if you don't like this one, you can look for a different one. They're going to be fairly similar, but this is the city's science scope and sequence. And it's laid out pretty similarly. Let's see, if we scroll down, 3K, let's see. Let's go to grade 2. And so in grade 2, we'll see, these are the different, this is the second unit for grade 2. So properties and patterns of water, recommended time, 12 weeks. So we're looking at that scope, what we're talking about. We're talking about properties and patterns of water. We're looking at sequence. How long is this going to take? And then we have these standards within that. All of them are listed out. They always give them those little codes, and then they will maybe break them down even further. Looking at these, I always think that they ask teachers to do an awful lot in 1 year. And I would guess that most teachers don't tend to get to the end of their scope based on, strictly what is being assigned to them. They ask a lot. There's, years in history where they're supposed to do like the pre-colonial through the Civil War, and that just is too much history for 1 year. So teachers are going to do their best. You're going to get teachers who, will jump right into the Revolutionary War in October, and then you'll have teachers who are coming to you in May saying, we're just getting to the Revolutionary War. So the teachers are doing their best. Our job is to then be, adaptable to wherever their students are and wherever their curriculum is. And using this as, again, those like sort of guidelines, but not necessarily like a roadmap. Let's go back to this. I don't know how to have like multiple windows open at once. If anyone has tips. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Can you see that? I don't know what it looks like for all of you. Okay, great. Yeah, anyone have anything they want to add before we kind of move on to talking about like how we can use these? I'll take a quick look at the chat. Great.
Actually, I have a
Yeah,
question.
please. Yeah.
Does the scope and sequence change over like I see that like it's linked like the 2022 version. Does it change over time, or is it like generally the same year by year?
Yeah, it's generally the same year by year. You'll see somewhere it's listed as like 2014 to 2015, and that is still the one they're using today. And that's just the year it was like initially put out. So, a lot of them will say like the education chancellor is Carmen Farina. She hasn't been our education chancellor in a long time. Or it'll say David Banks. He is also no longer our education chancellor. So they definitely stick around. So they do sometimes change. But yeah, I would say tend to stick around for a while. Every once in a while, Adams kind of wanted to override the reading curriculum recently. So that obviously was a more recent change, but like social studies history hasn't changed in quite some time. So yeah, do charter schools also follow this? Most do. They don't necessarily have to, but I generally see when that charter schools do follow this. I'd say usually it's private and independent schools that don't follow this, although again, some might. And I would say mostly what I'm seeing from like independent and private schools is that it's usually the like what the students should be learning, the kind of skills they're learning are going to be similar, and it's more like the subject matter that they switch around. So, New York City, 4th grade, you do American Revolution. They might do that in 3rd grade, something like that. And then where can we find out about the changes? Usually on these websites, so on the NYC what is it? We Teach NYC. They'll have whatever the most up-to-date version is. And then also, yeah, I think, on the NYC DOE website, sometimes they'll make announcements about when there's changes. But it's not, they never just like have it's really not very clear. There isn't generally like a big announcement. They don't send things out. I mean, they will to the schools. They'll let the principals kind of know when these changes happen. But for us, it's about just sort of staying on top of it yourself and keeping a little pulse on what's happening in the education world and in whatever city it is that you're in. And it can be confusing because, like I said, it'll list it as like the 2014, 2015 curriculum, which is still the 2025 curriculum, but they don't say that like on the actual PDF. When they do change, they don't change a lot most of the time, because, kindergartners need to learn to read. That's always going to be true. Do you happen to know how homeschoolers usually follow the standards? I don't know a ton about homeschool curriculum in the city. I would say a lot of the times they're going to follow those, at least here, because by the time they get to high school, they'll still have to take all the same exams, the regents and things like that. So whoever their instructor is will want them to kind of stay on track with that. But I also know many homeschoolers who have done entirely different curricula, especially like in earlier levels. So no, they don't necessarily have to. They do have to take certain tests though. So it kind of depends. Or at least even if it's not a test, they have to prove that they are at grade level to the government to allow them to do that. So any other questions? Great. All right. So why do we care about this? Why does this matter? I know why I care about it, but I would love to first hear from all of you. Like, why do you have thoughts? If you've used it before, or if you're even thinking about using it, do you have thoughts on why we need to do this as museum educators? We're not in the classroom. We do get to write our own curriculum and our own lesson plans and our own tours. Isabella, yeah.
I find that it's really helpful for teachers because they can then use they're like, what standards are you guys meeting? And that they can use that as an argument to admin to let admin approve the field trip, pay for expenses, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing Jessica in the chat is agreeing. It helps convince the teachers that our programs are worth coming to. Yeah, absolutely. It really helps. And especially, I totally agree about admin. We get principals all the time who the teachers are on board and the principal's like, I don't want to pay for a bus, or I don't want to deal with a bus, or, I don't like field trips. And being able to say like, but look, it checks off all these things that you're asking your classroom teacher to do. We can do it in 45 minutes. Yeah, so definitely it is huge for that. Kind of gives it like a stamp of legitimacy. Heidi?
For how I use it usually is to base off recommended age groups. So when we are promoting our programs, we can say, okay, this is recommended for this age group. I've kind of matched it to in Georgia, we call it the standards of excellence is usually how we see it. But this is helping me because I'm looking up some things under the scope and sequence as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, right? It helps us to align to ages. I feel like as you work with kids long enough, you tend to have like a sense of what's right for a certain age. And this can kind of be like a checklist of like, am I on the right track with that? Like, okay, yeah, someone else agrees with me. That like this is the right age to be doing this activity with. Anyone else?
I think anything we can do to take something off the teacher's plate too, just with they have so much they have to account for. So if when they come, they having something that when they go back to school, maybe they can just take off their plate is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. I often see my job as like, how can I just help a teacher as best I can? I'm seeing in the chat, Max is saying it can also provide other ways to support student learning as well, as opposed to reading from a textbook, definitely. And it's useful to connect with students. This is from Jennifer. It's useful to connect with students to understand what they are learning in the classroom. Definitely, right? So if we know, okay, the fourth grade is on this, topic in science, and then we bring them to our museum, we know that they'll have some background in that, or will be learning about it later on if they haven't, yet started. And so it can add a different like type of learning other than a textbook that then will then be, reflected back in their classroom. And yeah, I think it kind of makes it so that a trip is part of their learning and not this like separate one-time thing that has nothing to do with the rest of their life and that they will then forget. Anyone else? Great. I mean, you've all said what I was going to say. I think the one other way that I like to use it is when I'm thinking about keeping myself accountable or doing like self-reflection on what I'm working on. I can, I think about these in two ways. One is I have an object that I really want to teach with. I'm going to write something about that. And then going back and saying, like, okay, did I, check these buttons? Or saying, we're not getting enough third graders in. Here's the third grade standards. What can I do to support that? So it's, you can kind of look at it from starting with the standards or ending with the standards, but it gives you sort of a checklist. And you can say like, okay, I had this idea. I wrote out a lesson plan. Am I actually doing anything with it? And it's this like pre-made list. You don't have to come up with it, that you can go through, and maybe you don't check off every single standard, obviously, but if you can say like, okay, I've hit like 5 of these, that seems worthwhile. Or I'm only hitting 2. How can I improve that? And again, we're not in a classroom, so we get to decide how many of those standards feels like enough. And, that lets it be a tool for us instead of something that's, I don't know, being smushing our creativity. Can just help it. All right. So we're gonna do a little bit of practice. Here I have one of the literacy standards. I picked it at random. So determine the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source. Provide an accurate summary of the source distinct from prior knowledge or opinions. If you have like an object that you're really excited about, you can definitely think about it through that. But I also have brought up this lovely painting from the Brooklyn Museum's collection. Anyone work at the Brooklyn Museum? No. Okay. Well, hopefully you've at least been there or will come visit it. This is on display, and it is Francis Guy, Winter Scene in Brooklyn. So thinking about how would you use this object to teach to this standard? So determine the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source. Provide an accurate summary of the source distinct from prior knowledge or opinions. So I'll give us a couple, maybe just like a minute or two if you want to jot down some ideas of a quick, even just like a turn and talk question, or it can be if you, are quick on your feet and you want to do a whole lesson, it's up to you. But how would you use, this painting to teach this standard? And then we can come back and talk about it. So I'll stop talking.
What grade is it for again?
Oh, great question. Let me go back. It is for 6th grade, 6th to 8th.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So middle school. All right. I see a couple people still jotting down ideas. They'll give us another minute. All right. Does anyone want to share how would you approach this? You can put it in chat, say it out loud. I see Lunid. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. You have a senses activity. What would you see if you were one of the people here? What would you smell, hear, feel? Absolutely, right? So, you look at this painting with your 4-year-old. This is something you could absolutely do with a 4-year-old or go up in the ages. I think that works for a lot of ages. I think it's a great like starting question, even into high school, just to kind of get them into the like throw them into the painting. Um, so yeah, definitely, right. And that is you're taking this question about senses, and they have to use their prior knowledge to think about like, I've seen snow before. What does snow make me feel? I have, there's some chimneys. Maybe they know about, what does wood smoke smell like? What do animals smell like? All these different things. What would you hear? There's, horses. What do horses sound like? And so you're kind of starting with this idea of, prior knowledge and bringing them right into the painting. Anyone else want to share? Emma said, have one student describe the artwork to their classmate, and their classmate can make a drawing based on the description. After they finish their drawing, they look again at the artwork and share if they see anything new or surprising. I love that. I've done that as an adult. It's super fun, and it definitely makes you think about not using prior knowledge, right? You have to really be looking at the subject matter and thinking of it like as a text. So, there is a tall tree without any leaves all the way on the left in the middle of the painting, you can't just say there's a tree because then they might draw it with leaves or they might draw the wrong kind of tree. I have no idea what kind of trees these are, but you want to be as specific as possible. And then also when they look at it together, think about like, well, what didn't we know? What didn't occur to us. Isabella, your hand was raised.
Yeah. So this is what I wrote. I wrote, how would you describe the painting to someone who hasn't seen it before? What themes are present in the painting? Is the painting trying to convey something? Is there something unique within the painting itself?
Yeah, great. What are you thinking of this for like middle school? Amazing. Can you say the beginning part again? There's
Yeah, I said, how would you describe the painting to someone who's never seen it before?
Yeah, right. So it's a very similar activity to the last one. Maybe you don't have them draw it, but just talk through it. Is I think such a good way to just get them to start their observations. And summarize, right? You can't just what are the important parts. Absolutely amazing. Anyone else? Heidi?
Kind of going off of what y'all were saying already, adding, okay, I know middle school, this might be a little bit advanced. I'm trying to think of art curriculum, but like the elements and principles of design specifically for them to be able to pinpoint it a little easier. They can kind of go down that like a checklist almost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, right. Thinking about foreground, background, the different layers, right? This painting, half of it is the sky. I think that's a really interesting thing about this painting that is important to understand as you're reading it. I always think of like, how do we read a painting like it was a text, or how do we read any object like it was a text? And I think that those design elements are so important to that and definitely help them, kind of, I think that's a good way of having them step out of the concepts that are like that they already know, right? They know, okay, this is winter. Why do you know it's winter? What about it tells you this is winter? How do you know that's snow? How do you know it's not just white dirt or salt or, so kind of getting them to look past their prior knowledge. Amazing. So this is one of those ways where you can decide, okay, I need to hit these standards. My teachers are asking for these standards. How can I create something to support that part of their learning? This is something that's harder to get in a classroom. How do I create something that's going to help them? And then there's the other way of going about it where you start with the object and then think, what standards can I put on this? So you can really do it either way. We're running out of time, so I was going to have us practice that other way, but I am not going to do that today. I pulled up, just so you can all see, this is a lesson plan from where I work. I did not write this particular lesson plan, but it's free on our website, so it's easy to find. This is a Observations and Inferences lesson plan from the Center for Brooklyn History. As you can see, we have, aim, objective materials, all of that. But then on the second page, we list out all of those standards that we know align with this particular lesson. So we've divided it by age, and then there's a long list of them. We teach mostly 4th through 12th grade, and you'll see a lot of them, even from 4th to 12th, are kind of the same. So, draw evidence from literary or informational text to support analysis, reflection, and research. That's 4th grade. In 12th grade, we have cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, right? So it's the same basic concepts, they're just aging them up a little bit, making them more complex. So, you can really think about these in terms of you can have one lesson that works for many age groups. And there might be ways to differentiate the lesson, to pare it down a little bit, but the standards shouldn't like get in the way of what you're teaching. They can be used as a tool to kind of help support that. So I'm gonna stop the recording now if I can figure out how to do that, and give us just a little time to talk without the recording. Here it is. If I can click it.
Oh, there we go. Don't forget. All right, welcome everybody. This is the lesson planning session. So just to make sure you're in the right place, lesson planning. I'm going to try to make it as interactive as I can. There will be some practice time towards the end of our session. I'm going to introduce a particular strategy for building a lesson plan, and then we're going to practice a component of that together and hopefully have some time to get some feedback from each other. How's that sound? All right, so let me get my screen sharing up and running. All right. What do you all see? That's gonna be fun. All right, so can you all see the level up? Okay, great. I can see like 5 of you right now. You can figure I don't need to see. Nice. All right, there we go. That's better. I can see more of you now. All right, so as I said in my introduction, my name is Veronica Miller. I am the manager of education with WCS at the Bronx Zoo. And I have about over 15 years of informal education experience, both mostly at the zoo, but also in a natural science museum down in North Carolina. And I've written a lot of lesson plans and helped other folks learn how to write lesson plans. So hopefully this will be a helpful session for you. Sorry, my Roomba is also just decided to run right outside my door, so I'm going to pause that so it's not so loud. All right. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to learn about a couple of different ways to approach lesson plan writing. And then I'm going to tell you about my favorites and the one that I have found to be most successful, especially as a mission-driven organization and an informal education setting. I feel like the one I'm going to show you is can help us as informal educators the most, make sure that because we have such a short time with folks often that we want to make sure our lessons are the most focused and getting across what we really want to get to in a short amount of time. So being efficient in our lesson planning. So just a couple of basics in case you're super new to lesson plans. I guess that would be helpful is if you could, can I see it if you put something in the chat? Yes, I can. If you could in the chat, just put like, where are you in your lesson planning career? Are you like brand new, just started? Or have you been doing this for a long time and just trying to like learn some new techniques? That would really help me kind of know where y'all are at and how I can support y'all. Right. Right, we got some newbies, we got some folks looking just for some new strategies, some folks that have a little experience. Awesome. Cool. All right, so it looks like we have a good mix. So like I said, I'm going to share one particular method that I really like, but I'll try to go through it a little bit quickly so that maybe we have some time towards the end for other folks to share strategies that they really like, because lesson planning, it looks like we have some folks that do have a lot of experience and are looking for other ideas. So if the one that I'm sharing is one you're familiar with already, maybe we can, hopefully we can learn from each other as well. So thank you for sharing that. So for those of you that are like super new to lesson planning, which some of you are, just really quick, these are some of the essentials, like the basic essentials for a lesson plan. For today, I created a lesson plan for today. So the outcome that I am hoping for is that you all will understand the steps of the backward design method, also known as the universal understanding by design, sometimes another name used for this method, and get some time to practice developing particularly a program outcome, which is very central for that method. But any lesson plan, any good lesson plan needs some, I forgot to change that title, that's okay, not class activities, basic components, which is, this is what we're going to do today, is the review a lesson plan. We're going to outline the steps for the backward design method, and then we're going to do some practice. So it would be helpful if you have some pen and paper or a computer or tablet, something that you can like just make some, brainstorm some ideas on and like workshop a little program outcome. So these are the lesson plan essentials, the basics. So the three main components of any lesson plan, no matter what strategy you use to complete it, are an outcome, sometimes also called an objective or a goal, something that sort of helps focus the lesson. Like, what are you hoping people will get out of it at the end, right? Most of the time, we're not just doing it to do it. We usually have a purpose behind the lessons that we're creating. So the outcome or objective or goal or whatever you want to call it is just a statement that kind of describes that, what you think participants should know or what they're going to do by the end of the program. These often it's helpful for them to be specific to help keep your program focused. You want it ideally to be measurable in some way, although my definition of measurable is not so specific as if you were doing like research and evaluation. It's more just like, did they do it? Did they not? That's a measurement, right? That can be a measurement. Or it can be more specific if you're looking, depending on the goals of the program. And then, is your outcome audience appropriate? And audience, we're going to talk a little bit about what that means a little later. But outcomes, usually I recommend, depending on the length of your program, you don't want more than like 1 or 2. Otherwise, it gets, especially if you're running a 1-hour school program, one objective, one outcome is plenty, because you only have an hour with them. So you really want your plan, your lesson plan, to be focused on the specific objective that you want. And if you have too many objectives, it can get feel rushed, or you don't achieve any of them, not in a meaningful way anyway. So I like the less is more approach when you're thinking about outcomes for a program. Oftentimes, even for like a camp program, I might, if it's an all-day thing, I might even only have 1 or 2 for an all day. And then everything that we're doing that day sort of supports that outcome. The other component, one of the other components is going to be obviously the activities. What are you actually doing during the program with your participants? Again, you need to think about these being audience appropriate, accessible, thinking about the accessibility on all levels, making sure the activities are focused, and that they directly support the outcomes that you're striving for. And then the third component is some way to check for understanding or measure your outcome. Like, did you achieve your outcome? That's assessment. I'm not going to go much into assessment today because that could be like a whole workshop all on its own, like a multi-day workshop. So that's kind of too big a topic for us to really go into well today. But it is definitely something to think about when you are creating any lesson, is how am I going to know that I've achieved my outcome? And so just thinking about that. Right. So the two design methods that I want to talk about today, and there are many more than this, these are sort of 2 big ones that I've come across in my experience, like in my time in this field, and that is the forward design method and the backward design method. So they're sort of a little bit opposite of each other in terms of the direction that you go when you're writing your lesson plan. So oftentimes, forward design lesson plans are activity rooted. So oftentimes you have the activity that you want to do, and then you kind of design a whole lesson around it. Or you have a specific topic that you want to teach about. And so then you plan all of your activities to like tie into that topic. So like birds, and then we're going to talk about feathers and beaks and feet. And I come from a zoo, so all my examples are animal related. Sorry. And then, so you start with that topic or activity idea, then you kind of create the objectives, like what specific things do they want to learn? And then create, outcomes often come after the activity designs. It's like, oh, what are they going to learn in this activity, right? I've already designed this activity, but then what are they getting out of it? And this can be useful if you have like very specific topics that you have to cover, or that need to be understood. I think more about the formal education setting when I think about this, because they're teaching to a test often, or they have very specific topics that like outcomes that they or knowledge that they have to impart to their students. And so that can be a little bit like they have to start there sometimes. But sometimes that might be the case in an informal program as well, depending on sort of the goal, what type of program it is. The backward design method sort of starts at the end and works backwards, as its name. Also, as I said, it's called understanding by design. And this method is very outcomes rooted. And this is a method that I prefer, and what I teach my team, and how we usually approach most of our lesson planning as a team. And that is you start with the specific desired outcome. So I'm going to go through some examples of each of the steps of the backward design method, but just know you're going to start with a very specific outcome, and then you're going to create the activities to support that outcome rather than the other way around, creating your objectives to support the activities, right, or what they're getting out of it. And this really ensures that your activities are focused, that they are aligned with the outcomes that you want, because you have a very solid sense of what your outcomes are before you ever start thinking of activities. So I think this can help with creating programs that are very intentional, because oftentimes we do have a very short amount of time with our audience, and very focused. Again, efficient lessons that focus on just like one or two outcomes that you're hoping for. Any questions so far? I'm going through it pretty quick, I know, but I do want to make sure we have some practice and discussion time. So, okay. So there's really 3 steps to the backward design method. First, you identify your outcomes, and for me, that's usually kind of what takes the longest. Then you're gonna think about how will you know that your outcomes are met. So that assessment piece, you kind of think about that. And then you create your activities to support those outcomes and support the assessment, having the assessment built into the program and the activities. So step 1, like I said, is identifying those outcomes or actions. And I say action because my particular organization, WCS, is a very mission-centered organization. And I know many other of our institutions are as well. You have a specific goal overarching goal for your organization. The Wildlife Conservation Society is a wildlife conservation organization. And so everything that we do, we try to tie back to that mission of saving wildlife in wild places, including all of our education programming. And so for our team, we have thought about, and we're still in the process of doing some of this, but particularly we've kind of done it mostly in our school programs so far, and now we're implementing it with our general audience programming, family programming, children programming, things like that. But it's pretty solid in our school programs right now, is thinking about this. For all of our school programs, our main goal is somehow to get kids engaged with conservation. Having some kind of action that they take, something that they do within our program that is going to connect them to saving wildlife, or thinking about the conservation work that we do, or thinking about, what they can do at home. And so we took a long time to kind of determine what that looks like for each age group. And then kind of went from there in designing our programs around it. It's like, what do we want our kindergartners? What can we, how can our kindergartners engage with conservation? What might that look like? And then how can we design a program around that, outcome? So thinking about how does this program support the goals and mission of your organization or your department? And who is the audience, and what types of goals are appropriate for them? So for our kindergartners, engaging with conservation looks very different than with our middle school and high schoolers, right? Our kindergartners, it's a lot about building empathy for animals and wildlife and nature. But with our high schoolers, we can actually teach them how to write a letter to their local government officials, right? Or their school board, or whoever, help them learn advocacy skills. And so their action can be a little bit more concrete than it is with our kindergartners. But that doesn't mean it's less important, right? It just looks different. So thinking about that as you're developing your outcomes. One example that we have is a program we have called Dr. Zoolittle. It is for K to second graders. And our outcome for that program, I pulled it straight from our lesson plan, is to develop a sense of empathy in K to second grade students for the care and protection of wildlife. So that's where we started. We came up with that first, and then like, okay, what can we do to help kindergartners and second graders develop that sense of empathy for wildlife and care, right? And so then that led to this program called Dr. Zoolittle, where the kids get to do, it's a play-based program where they get to pretend to be zoo vets, and they like take care, we give them tools that veterinarians use, and they borrow a little stuffed animal patient, and they like play in class. And that is a great way to build that empathy, because we've done other things to like build up that activity. We bring, you know, a live animal and talk about how the exams that the veterinarians do are very similar to exams that doctors do for them, building that like personal connection, right? So thinking about that kind of thing. Those activities directly tie into building empathy, right? We want them to have a sense of connection with our animals because of how they're similar. And then they get to practice those empathy skills and show empathy to those animals by caring for them in a pretend play way. It's super cute. So that's kind of what outcome building can look like. That's what it looked like in this particular case. So once you have your outcome, then you're going to go into determining evidence, which basically just is that how do you know your result has been achieved, that your outcome has been achieved? What kind of assessments make sense for the desired outcome, the length and type of program, and the audience that you have. So thinking about all of those things, like I said, assessment could be a whole separate workshop. So we're not going to focus too much on that today. But I will give you an example from a different school program that we have that's for 3rd to 5th graders. And our kind of, we have an activity that we have embedded into the program that helps us assess if they have kind of understood and made the connections that we're hoping they're going to make in the class. And so towards the end of the program, we ask them to draw or write a conservation plan to support local wildlife. The whole program before this has been about how they, as you know, kids can be good neighbors to wildlife in their local wildlife. It's all a local wildlife focused program. And then they get to show us a way that they think they can be a good neighbor to fox turtles or birds or whatever. And so this activity kind of, we can look at the stories or drawings that they've created, the plans that they've created, and see, kind of get a nice assessment of like, how much did they absorb from what we did? And then the third step is create the activities. So thinking about what activities will support that outcome and give you the assessment tool like that you are looking for. How long you have to think about with activities, how long is the program? So you want to make sure if you have a 30-minute program, you don't pick an activity that ends up taking 45 minutes. And then thinking about how can you utilize the unique assets that you have at your institution to achieve your outcome. Always remembering, like, people are coming to your institution for a specific reason. Like, there's something about your organization that attracted them. For the zoo, it's usually the animals. For an art museum, it might be a specific artist, or in a history museum, that specific topic that they're, that specific artifacts that you have at your museum that they can't see anywhere else, right? So thinking about what are those unique things about your organization and the assets that you have access to that draw people in and are gonna help support those outcomes that you're looking for. A last example for this step. Let's see if my link will work. I'm going to show you our exact lesson plan for this program, and just know there's I thought about pulling lots of templates for lesson plans, but you really just have to Google it, is all you need. There's like a bazillion different ways that a lesson plan can actually look. And it doesn't really matter how you decide to organize your lesson plan. It's more how you approach creating it. So this one, we have a couple of different templates that we use for our school plans. It's mostly a written template. For our GA programs, we use more of a table style template where it's like timing, activity, materials needed, that kind of thing. So you kind of can definitely Google it and see what fits for your team, you personally, like what works for your brain, because I have learned different brains process information very differently. And so how you organize the lesson plan information is kind of personal. So we include a lot of information for our lesson plans. We have our learning objective or outcome. We have our conservation action, which is what I told you about, is like that thing that we want them to do in the program. It's sort of our assessment, also serves as our assessment tool often. But I wanted to show you this program because one of the activities that I want to go back to our objective is to engage students in the creative problem solving required in conservation science to develop a foundation of asking questions, following that line of inquiry through innovative moods or means. And then our action is to use creative problem solving skills to design innovative solutions to human wildlife conflict. So in this particular program, my team came up with what I think is a very cool activity to support those outcomes, and be an assessment tool. And that is a stakeholder debate. We call it the Great Rat Debate because the example that they use is focused around the rat epidemic in New York City. And so they created this activity to help put the kids, see all the different people that are involved in making decisions of any kind of conservation thing. And this can apply not just to wildlife conservation, it can really apply to any organization. There's always a lot of stakeholders making this in any decision that is made, right? What building to preserve, what artwork to put in the museum, like what artists get highlighted and which ones don't, those kinds of things. So, the kids, we have a group, biologists, local people, corporations, government officials, listing out some of the challenges that are involved with how many rats we have in New York City. And then a list, we did give them a list of potential, like proposed solutions. And then they have to take on the role of whichever stakeholder they've been assigned, and they have a debate. And they have to come to like a consensus between the different groups. So that's just like one example of, this is for middle school and high school. So this is a higher level activity. We're not going to have second graders. It's not necessarily appropriate for second graders, right? They can have a debate, but they won't necessarily be able to have a full understanding of the stakeholders concept and things like that. So we can have a richer conversation like this with our middle schoolers. So, yeah, so those are the 3 steps for backward design method, or understanding by design. Like I said, that is my particular favorite way to create a lesson plan because we are so very outcomes focused at our organization and very mission based. I think it lends itself well to any kind of mission supportive programming design. But it is certainly not the only method out there, and other methods can be very useful in different situations. So I wanted to give you all a little bit of a chance to practice creating or thinking about building an outcome, thinking of an outcome. Okay, so we're going to take 5 minutes. So we're going to go to math 153. And if we need less time than that, that's fine. Just like give me a thumbs up when you're done. And just think about a program that you either are currently running or want to run or are like have been tasked to create. And think about, I'm going to put the outcome slide back up just so you can kind of have those questions to think about. There we go. While you're doing it. And just start brainstorming an outcome for that program. Okay. What might that outcome look like for your particular program? Any questions? No? Okay. And take silence is a good thing. Okay, so we'll give about, like I said, till 1:53 to give you some working time. I'm going to be quiet because I always hate when people say go work and then talk the whole time. So go. Okay, that was probably quick, but I definitely want to make sure we have some time for discussion. So this can go a couple of different ways, just depending on what you all want or need. My original intention was that we could, if anybody wanted to share the outcome that they came up with and workshop it a little bit, see if they or share any struggles that you had creating an outcome or something that you're really proud of, that you're like really excited about. You can share out any of that. We could also go in the direction of jumping into sharing other methods that you all have used to create lesson plans. So I'm open to either one. Just go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to share something, whether it's your outcome or another lesson plan style that you have used successfully in the past. Or any questions that you have. Also, it's
I can say something.
sure.
So I am noticing that there might be, I am a museum educator at the Art Institute of Chicago, and this sounds very familiar when it comes to our program overview, which is what we do before we do the lesson plan. So
Okay.
we create, like, this is very instrumental to developing like an umbrella outcome for that program and an umbrella of yeah, outcomes and goals. And then once we get into the lesson plan, it is different. It is more like, it's literally, your lesson plans are like a page and a half.
Okay.
So it's very interesting to see this. It's kind of giving me an insight on how the program was developed, but I am having a hard time connecting it to the actual lesson plan.
Okay. I'm curious because in our team, this becomes the lesson plan, right? Like this sort of starts the process with this outcome and then leads to like an outline, and then that gets filled in with the actual activities, and that is our lesson plan. So I'm curious about how your lesson plan differs from this process. If you're using this process to sort of start the development of a program.
So I think the curiosity is mutual because I'm still kind of I'm interested in maybe seeing more of the lesson plan itself. Um, so we have, for instance, programs for art plus activism, art plus art across cultures, and then we have uh, that first thing is to develop the outcomes.
Mhm.
And then that leads to a lesson plan that is specific on an artwork. Say you say you work for a zoo, so say an animal. And
Mhm.
then the first thing we do is we divide the lesson plan into three sections, which usually starts with observation, connection, then reflection. And that's what the lesson plan in itself is about. However, I do find fascinating that sometimes in creating activities, we, because our lesson plan is separate from the overview, we sometimes just look for more multimodal activities without considering too much how that activity serves the outcome. And something really interesting that I heard from you is how the activity, which is a step 3, uh, that is such an essential question that we should ask early on, like how this activity will support the outcome. It's not just to make it more engaging, but also to really make the students connect with the outcome.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things that I found that I'm definitely taking with me from this
Yeah.
lesson. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like you all use a similar process, but somewhere along the line, it got divided. That third step kind of got pulled away from this
Yeah.
step, but really it's all one thing.
Okay.
Right? Like if you're creating that overview, it should be part of the lesson plan, right? Because otherwise, then why
No,
did
I
you?
think you said it
Yeah.
right. You said it
Right.
just right. We just kind of have the lesson plans in one side and we have the overview for the entire program in other, but it is the same.
Right.
In fact, we cannot do a
So it's
lesson
like
plan without
different,
first.
each lesson plan is like a different component of the
Yeah,
program overall.
yeah,
Got it. That makes sense.
yeah.
And that happens with us too sometimes, especially for like in our family programs. we'll have the sort of or camp programs that are bigger and longer that have multiple parts. Sometimes we get that drift as well, where it's like we have this vision for the program overall, but then we get into the nitty-gritty and excited about different activities and kind of lose that thread of like, wait, yes, we want to go to Jungle World because that's one of the best exhibits, but like, how are we connecting it back to that goal that we had for this program overall, right? And that's really easy, especially when you have such cool things that you like want to take participants to, and like fun things to do, and you get really excited about them. But sometimes you do have to like think about what is the purpose of this particular activity or going to this particular place, or looking at this particular artifact or artwork or exhibit or whatever it is. And would a different object or place actually support our goal better, right? Even if this is the most popular, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one for this program.
Right.
Based on our goals. So yeah, that's so easy to happen. It takes a lot of work to like keep coming back to, and that's my job as manager, is like keep bringing my team back. What is the goal? What is the goal? Right? And bringing that focus back. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to share? About 5 minutes left. So if you have any questions, thoughts.
Could you share a little bit about, so we have our learning outcomes, how you and your team brainstorm some of the activities, and also talk a little bit more about measuring outcomes.
Sure. So a lot of times when we are working on creating new lessons, we have a monthly programming meeting. And so we'll kind of take that meeting when we're all together to kind of work through what we want the goals of our programs to be, sort of overall, right? If we're like in categories, like our school programs, like this is the focus we want for all of our school programs overarching, right? And then we'll assign out to like either individuals or pairs. I like to do pairs a lot of times for lesson planning development. And then that group, that pair or person will go off and kind of create things on their own. And then we always do a peer review so that it gives a chance so that everybody is on board with knowing the direction we want all of our programs to be going. We might have some workshopping time if anybody's struggling with coming up with a specific outcome for their particular program or age group or whatever, their particular audience that they're focusing on. And then they'll, if we workshop through with them what outcome they're working towards, and then they'll go off and kind of create or think about activities they want to do. Sometimes my team it's a very open collaborative team. So a lot of times they'll like workshop with each other, just like in the office next to each other, like if they're the other folks in their office, like in the room with them if they're stuck on something. And then again, we can come back during those programming meetings to if there's a particular activity that's like I kind of want to do this kind of thing, but I'm not really sure what that looks like. And then we'll kind of workshop it together if needed. Most of the time they are very creative and come up with amazing activities, either on their own or in their pair. Occasionally we have a group of 3 that's like creating something together. So we try to make space for both individual brainstorming time and collaborative brainstorming time, because different brains work differently. Not everybody brainstorms well in a group and is their most creative in a group. So we want to make space for both. In terms of assessments, right now, most of our assessments are embedded. We have a relatively young team right now, so all the training and things that we did on assessment a few years ago. Now our new folks that are here haven't gone through that particular training on assessments. So I usually have them think about, kind of like I was talking about in here, like, what can you do in the program that will help you know that the outcome has been reached, right? So just thinking about it from that perspective, and not necessarily, I think, at least for me, I didn't come from an education background. I came from a science background. And so when I came in and they started talking about like formative and summative assessments and like embedded assessment and all these terms, like pedagogical terms, were being thrown out there, I was like, I don't know what any of that means, and it's very overwhelming. And so reframing it in like, just to like, how do we know that we're doing what we're trying to do, right? Like, that's it. That's what assessment is. How do you know that you reached your goal? And so just then that kind of helps, I think, reframe assessment to be a little more accessible to newer educators. And just thinking about, like, is there an activity like that drawing activity that we were talking about? That is a form of embedded assessment, right? Like, we can go back and look at those drawings and know to what extent those students were like receiving the like concepts that we were sharing with them about how to be a good neighbor to wildlife, right? So because some of them will just like either be totally stuck and not know. They'll draw the animal that we brought to class, and that's it, right? Because they met that animal and they're excited about it and they draw it. We're still building empathy, so we're meeting a goal, just maybe not the specific goal of that program. Which I try to keep that in mind too. Is like, there are different levels of goals for programs, right? So like, even if we have a specific outcome for every program, but even if we don't meet that, are we creating a positive experience for those kids with nature and wildlife? Because that's our real goal, right? Like, that's our mission. So as long as we're getting there, even if we don't quite get that specific outcome for that program, we've done our job. And I think that can be true for other organizations as well, and takes a little bit of the pressure off for that assessment piece, because assessment is important, and we do send out, like, post surveys. We have a whole research and evaluation team that does that part for us. So we are doing formal assessments, but I think taking the pressure off those informal in-program assessments actually helps it make more sense, and it happens more naturally. I don't know if that answered your question, but all right, our time is up. Thank you all for coming. I hope you took something away from the day. We're going to go back to the main room, and we'll start the next session.
The code here.
Sorry.
And now we're being recorded.
Yes.
All right, so you should be able to hop in here, and you can just type in, what do you think? What is your definition of object-based learning?
So you can go to menti.com and use the code that's there.
And I no longer have access to the chat, so.
I'll put the...
Or if you prefer to speak, we also, as educators, love to hear you.
So somebody in the chat said using tactile objects to create a sensory experience.
I was going to say, I'm having trouble doing a definition that doesn't just say it's learning from an object.
Yeah.
It's a primary source, and I consider myself a facilitator, right? All of the communication all the teaching is done by the object.
Mm-hmm. So the object is like the center of the learning experience.
I don't mind talking, just because I can't figure out how to get the Menti to work. My desktop is being silly. But to me, object-based learning is teaching or explaining a concept centering around an object or using the object as the basis to impart a concept.
Yeah. Like those. See if I can get this. Oop. You're very right. I missed a one in there. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so object-based learning is hard to define without the word object. But it's putting something that is engaging more than one sense at the center of learning, right? And why is object-based learning important? Like, what can you gain from learning from an object that you can't from just looking at or just talking to somebody, I should say? Yeah, participants can use all their senses. Does anybody here work with like really young children? I work with kids as young as 2 and up through 5th grade. Sometimes kids don't have the verbal skills yet needed to describe things. Sometimes they don't speak the same language. This is true for adults as well, right? So when you hand somebody an object, you're handing them a very tactile thing, and they can engage with it in a different way than just talking can. Learning styles. It is real. It creates a tangible connection to a concept. Yes. One of my favorite things about objects is that they connect past to present. And the way that we teach with objects, the way that I like to teach with objects, is having them tell stories. So I have an object here that, yeah, somebody said people notice objects and often ask specific questions about them, which is a way into a story of a place. So using the object in the storytelling links to their curiosity. Exactly. So this is one of my favorite objects because it tells a very interesting story. And yes, it is just a rock, but it's more than a rock. So I typically start off by asking anybody, what do you notice about this rock? You can type some things in the chat. Or if you have any thoughts that you want to say, you can say it. It has a lot of layers, yes. So we see multiple stripes in it. It's stripy, different colors, bands, colors, swirls, different colors. So if I had to infer things about this rock's past, it's very smooth looking. I know it's, Stephanie and I were talking about this. We're like, we're going to do learning from objects, but virtually. So I know that you can't feel the rock, but it is smooth. It's got a heft to it. Aesthetically interesting, even pretty. Now, we've noticed these swirls and these bands. What can that tell you about the rock's past? What do we think? We might have some, and this is a way to kind of access prior knowledge. So maybe it's layers of sediment. Yes, different kinds of soil on top of each other. Different things came together to make this rock. If you have a little bit of prior knowledge about the rock cycle, you might begin to see that this used to be millions and hundreds of years, millions. This used to be 2 different rocks. And so you can start to weave this story of millions of years ago, there were 2 rocks separated. They started to sit on top of each other. And then what happened? Do you have a guess? I saw somebody do this. Yes, they were compressed, right? So over millions of years, heat and pressure built up, and they smushed those rocks and melted them together to form these beautiful swirls. So now your object, it's not just a rock. We went on a journey over millions of years. We told the story of this rock, but we could also infer some scientific knowledge from it. Does anybody know the name of the type of rock that changes over time? Metamorphic, exactly. This started as a sedimentary rock. We can see those layers, but the swirls tell us that it's changed and melted into metamorphic rock. So you're trying to lead your students with an object and weave a story with that object. It might not seem like a story at first, but we traveled back in time. We experienced heat and pressure to form this new rock that was found on a beach in New Jersey. Unfortunately, though, and I'm sure a lot of you that maybe work with cultural artifacts encounter this problem. One of the challenges that we particularly face if you work with large cultural collections is, I know this is true for the Natural History Museum, but at the time they were collected, information was not collected with them. So this is one of my personal favorite artifacts that we have in our collection. This is bread made in the shape of llama, and it's been shellacked.
I just have to tell you really quickly, when you told me llama bread, I did not realize it was actually going to look like a llama. My mind is blown right now. Okay, continue.
This is my llama bread friend. We know that this llama bread came from Peru, but unfortunately, we have no other information about it. So when you teach with a cultural artifact, it's very important to keep context in mind. How many of you work with cultural artifacts, actually? You work with cultural stuff? Yeah. And you might have this problem. We often talk about cultural artifacts need to be left in situ where they are because the context around them tells that story. So we don't know what the llama bread was used for. We don't know if it was used for a ceremony, like a funeral or a wedding, if it was just somebody's dinner. It was just collected randomly. So cultural artifacts or learning from cultural objects, their stories can be pretty difficult to tell sometimes. I'm not sure what C2 means.
Oh, in situ.
Oh, in situ. Thank you. In context, in situation.
Sorry.
SITU. And situ. But their story can be a little more complex to tell if you don't have that cultural connection. And so with things like cultural artifacts and cultural objects, it's important to try to get as much context as possible. Whether that means going to talk to somebody from that culture, particularly if you work with like Native American collections or things like that. And I think it's okay to be upfront with people. We don't know much about this object because the time that it was collected, information was not gathered. So we have two different ways, two different objects. One we know the story of because it's a natural history object. One is a very cool cultural object that looks like a llama, but we don't know much about it. And that leads us to our next part. Stephanie, do you want to lead this part?
Yes, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this one more time. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. Apologies. So learning the fun paces of the Mentimeter. Okay, let's go back. All right, so you should, there it is. Lovely. So, okay, we fixed that one. So if you want, you're welcome to go ahead and throw your thought about what is object-based learning. If you don't, skip it. But we'll go ahead and skip to the next question, which is using 1 to 2 words, what is an object?
What's an object? What defines an object?
Or what can be an object, right? What can be an object in an informal learning setting? And so for some of us, that very well could be an animal.
All right, my llama bread.
Yeah, it could be an
fart.
I like that you read llama bread. I love a word cloud, y'all. I added mine in. Okay.
Touchable.
Mine are in there. And just while everyone's putting their answers in and we're watching it move around. Again, I'm still learning all the pros and cons of Mentimeter, but I love a word cloud. Yeah. There's also an open-ended question. There's graphs and surveys and ranking and all kinds of fun things. So if you have the opportunity to use technology in your in your programs where somebody can use a phone or computer to jump in. Great. So it looks like right now Thing is the one that's popping up as the most prominent. We've got quite a few other options happening here. I see an artifact, a work of art, right? An image, artwork. We've got, animal and artwork have come up again. Something that's touchable or physical to touch, which is great. We love being able to add that into our programming. Again, physical.
Material.
Yeah.
Image. I want to focus on image for a second.
Sure.
Because given a context, a digital representation can be considered an object. For example, if you teach any type of astronomy or astrophysics, or if you're visualizing things, if you do any kind of like microscope type work, you're visualizing something that you can't physically feel, you can still treat an image and learn from it the same way you might be able to learn from an object. You're engaging your senses, even though it's not touch, in a way that is different than just hearing somebody talk about it. Showing a picture of the sun through different filters will give the audience a different appreciation for the sun than if you were to just describe the colors of it. So even digital representations can be an object.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, we use an actual tangible picture in some cases, because I cannot bring you a whale shark as much as I would like to. I do not work at the Georgia Aquarium. But we do know that. So, all right. So as we move into this next side, I want you all to take a moment. We're going to talk about, we're obviously being at the aquarium. I'm going to talk a little bit about animals, but I want you to think about if you were describing, so whether maybe it's a piece of art, maybe it's a sculpture, maybe a live animal, you had to describe a turtle to someone, right? What are some of the terms? What are some of the ways that you would describe what a turtle is and what it looks like to tell someone about it? And again, feel free to type it in the chat or just unmute yourself and tell us.
Yeah, picture you are talking to a 2-year-old who just learned the word turtle today. How would you describe a turtle? Shell. That's a good one.
It is an animal, right?
Animal, so we know it's alive.
Slow moving.
Little green guy with a hard back, soft legs. I love that. Tail.
Yep. Oh, tail.
Oh, we have a head. Our turtle finally has a head.
Head.
Swims.
So he's a turtle, not a tortoise. Nice job.
Good job. Can bite. Yes. I often tell kids anything with a mouth can bite. Does not mean it will.
That is a very important rule. Cold-blooded animal.
Yeah.
Right.
Lays eggs.
Fantastic. All great things.
Legs, hailed, webbed
Love
feet.
it. Wrinkly.
Scoots. Somebody said scoots.
Oh, nice. I love a scoot. All right.
But these are all pretty, I can think of other animals that have shells. I can think of other animals that have 4 legs, a head, and can bite. That move slowly and things like that.
So what are some things, if you were going to add an object, what are some objects that you would prefer to have in talking about your turtle? I can tell you what I'd prefer to have right now, but somehow it has been misplaced. And I've searched high and low for it, and it is missing. So I've
a turtle shell.
Turtle shell. Yes, a turtle shell. That's what I was looking for. I found a replacement. Don't worry. But yeah, we've got scoots. Scoots are a really fun one. Does everybody know what a scoot is on a turtle? So on the back of the shell, right? And again, this is where my turtle shell would come into place, right?
I will run and grab a turtle shell.
I'll bring this big one out.
Okay.
Go ahead and do it. All right. So this is not the turtle that I wanted to start with, y'all, but it is the turtle that I will bring out. I'm actually not even exactly sure what species this is, but the scoot on the turtle shell is the scale. So each of these is a scoot. right? And so the shell continues to grow with the turtle, and the scute grows larger as the turtle gets bigger. So that's a scute, which is really cool. What is it made out of? Who knows? What's a scute made out of? This is
Harrison?
yes. Same thing as your
Yeah.
fingernails. Woo!
And I want to point out what Steph just did. I want to make it like explicit because when you're learning from objects, especially foreign objects like this, and we'll talk a little bit about this, you want to relate it to their life as much as possible. So that could be through, like, once again, accessing prior knowledge. Even with a cultural object, you could ask, like, have you ever eaten bread in the shape of an animal or something like that? What is a scoop made out of? It's made out of something on your body. So relating the object back to like something in their life will help that learning stick a little bit better.
For sure. Yes. This is obviously not a live turtle. But saying that out loud in case anyone gets a why are you holding it that way? But yeah, so we've got a shell is always a really great one, right? I think one of the, especially when working with younger children, being able to talk about how they can't come out of their shell. And the shell that I wanted for you today that has somehow found its way somewhere in the aquarium was a like red-eared slider, which is also really cool because you can see the spine inside the shell, which I think is such a fun thing to talk about, even with adults, right? We didn't, I remember growing up and seeing cartoons with little, and your turtle crawls out of a shell and, crawls back in. And so it's really fun, even though you kind of understand it, to see the spine and understanding that they are born and that whole shell is growing with them, which is really cool.
And
So
also,
yeah.
I'll point out with something like that too, if you want to teach somebody about a turtle, you might immediately think, let me grab a live turtle. But you would never know, looking at a live turtle, that their spine is connected to their shell.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you have various forms of the same topic, if you're talking about animals, you have a skeletal structure, the live animal, the skin or pelt of it, you get different things out of each of that same piece of the animal. If you're doing something with art or a cultural artifact, you could have multiple representations of the same artifact or that same artifact in different cultural contexts to learn different stories. That kind of makes sense. I think somebody said in the chat, or touch objects.
So one of my other favorites, if you've worked with animals in any setting, are skulls. I find this tends to be really fascinating to people. This is from a leatherback sea turtle, which is one of the largest of all of them. So much larger than your typical, smaller species. But sometimes the larger the item, the more impact it makes, right? The more grabbing it is. And so again, if I have a small turtle shell, that's really cool. But if I can, come out and show you a turtle this size, right? This is a really cool opportunity to talk a bit more about the difference between turtles and tortoises, right? This is a sea turtle. This is definitely different than a tortoise that you might think of too. Other thing, what else do you think of when you see this item, this animal? What else do you immediately want to start talking about? Or what do you have questions about?
The ocean, somebody said.
Oh yes, definitely the ocean, which makes my life easier at the aquarium. Hold on, I can't see the chat.
Where did you get it?
Great question, right? And that leads into a whole other thing. We talk about the Endangered Species Act and the pet trade and confiscated items. So these are all things. I actually don't know the origin of this specific specimen, but I do know that there are lots of items, lots of animals and animal things that have come from animals that were confiscated at US Customs, and they've actually donated them to zoos, aquariums, and museums so that they can be used for education, which I think it's really cool because it's taking something that was meant for something you know, maybe not the most important purpose in being able to use it to educate. So, yeah, great question. I wish I knew how old this animal was. Awesome. Very cool. All right. Shall I bring out the live animal?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I didn't go get the turtle, but I kind of really, this is one of my favorite animals to work with. So really quickly, I'm going to bring out what I have found as someone who did most of my work in zoos and then moving over to an aquarium. I was pleasantly surprised at how excited people are about this animal. So, any guesses? Anybody want to guess what I'm bringing out before I bring it out? It's
Oh, they got it.
oh, yeah, you're right. It's a horseshoe crab. Yeah, this animal, the coolest, so when we were doing a lot of virtual programming, the great thing about horseshoe crabs is I can bring it right up close and show you. You know, it's going to drip all over my computer, and I forgot to bring something to cover it this time.
Hey,
you got one. Fantastic.
Hi. So do you guys have a horseshoe crab skeleton? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Exoskeletons are great too, except they're so delicate, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so we do work with lots of horseshoe crabs. This is a really fun one because here in New York, especially right at Coney Island, right? These are animals that are literally just on the beach. And so we get a chance to, and a lot of people haven't seen them up close. So you get a chance to touch them, learn a little bit about them. Does anyone have questions? I always love to answer questions. Anybody know how many legs they have? Ooh, yes, great question. I want to get to that in a second. Shruti, don't cheat.
So
Shruti's my colleague.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they have 10 legs. 10 legs. And this is, I think, a male. I saw, yep. I can tell. I don't know if you'll be able to see because it's pretty hard. Oh, no, you can. You look at those first two legs up front. The lighting's not great. You can kind of see that they have little boxing gloves. And so that is a male. A female, all of their legs look exactly the same.
And I'll make the point again, though, that like objects like this is a great way to connect back to people's personal lives. Somebody in the chat learned that they have blue blood and we use it for medicine. Is that true? Yes, the horseshoe crab blood is copper based. So it comes out as blue and it's an anticoagulant. So they use it a lot in vaccines to keep the vaccine liquidy, I think. Something about how it like bonds to the liquid in the vaccine.
Yeah, I think it's something about, like the coagulant. Yep, yeah. You already said that. I'm
yes.
Water
but also these are animals that you can find on the beaches nearby here. So whether you're teaching a class about crabs, about ocean life, about conservation, you can use an object that can like connect back to what they see every day and might have heard about in the news.
Yeah. And so one of the things that, depending on the age range of our group, that we'll do is again, connect it to our different things that do affect us, right? So one, you said, the blood and vaccines, that works with people, right? The other big thing is that horseshoe crabs lay eggs, these little bitty tiny eggs. And there's a bird called the red knot. The red knot will come up and eat all the eggs. Now, one of the things that we're noticing due to climate change is we are losing some of our shoreline, which is making it harder for horseshoe crabs to get up on the beaches to lay eggs, which in turn is affecting the red knot and red knot migration. And so we're seeing that, these are things that are affecting the animals, but also affecting people, right? Because the loss of shoreline eventually is going to be a much bigger issue for us. So so in my thought, I was thinking, since we're having a little bit of, do you guys like the Mentimeter or should we just post in the chat? How do we feel, chat? Is the chat good? Do you want me to Mentimeter it up again? My question for you is, what is your favorite object to work with, and what story or message do you use or do you tell with it?
And I will correct myself because someone posted in the chat, I think it helps tell if the vaccine is contaminated, and you're right, because I just Googled it. So
good call. Cool. I will forward the Mentimeter. You can do either one. Let's do either one. So what is your favorite item to use? And also you can talk to us.
Yeah.
We're happy to talk to you too. Does anybody want to tell us what is their favorite object to use?
I'll say it. Also, hi, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Petra Cora. I work at the Wyckoff Farmhouse Museum, so the oldest house in New York. And my favorite item is, funnily enough, has to do with aquatics, even though I'm nowhere near the sea. Is the oyster shells, because the oyster shells, the farmers and other colonists that would come in the area, they first would harvest the oysters thinking that there were pearls but couldn't find any. But they would use the oyster shells to make a plaster as like the final sealant for their walls. So it was kind of like a paint sealant cement type of thing. So it was really cool just to like explain that story.
I love hardtack. Whoever put that in there. Tack is a wonderful thing. Learn how sailors work together.
And this is so much fun for me because, you know, living in an animal world, getting to hear what cool things that you're doing in your different spaces is so fun. And while we're posting some of these, does anyone have any questions? Questions about working with objects?
So someone in the chat, what do you say to people who think you should not have these biofacts or animals when showing people pelts or live animals? I sometimes encounter people who feel we shouldn't have these in our possession. Yeah, so the museum that I work, I mean, you can take it, I can, but
no, go ahead, and then I can. Great question though.
It's a great question. And I think it's always best to reframe it as when it was collected and why. So at least for like the museum that I work at, we're no longer actively collecting animals that are endangered. If you ever come to AMNH, we have a bunch of elephants on display, and that was collected in an era of conservation where conservation was killing the animal and bringing it back to the museum. And I think it's always best to reframe it in terms of now we use them for education. If people are like, why do you have these live animals? Shouldn't they be released into the wild? It's a complicated process to release animals back into the wild. I'm sure Stephanie can relate to that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, and it's definitely one that we do encounter pretty regularly. You know, again, a lot of the biofacts we have are either collected directly from an animal that used to be under our care, and you know, which in some cases people can be a little iffy about that, but I particularly believe it's really cool to be able to talk about and tell the story of that specific animal, and they kind of live on in that educational option, which I think is so cool. But as far as, you know, a lot of these, again, we've gotten biofacts that have been confiscated. Like one of my favorite things, and I'm about to age myself right now, is the suitcase for survival, which was something that came out, I think, in the 90s, where U.S. Fish and Wildlife had collected all of these things. They had confiscated them. And so they were literally putting together a suitcase, and we're talking not your rolly suitcase, the old school only handle carrying suitcases. And they had all kinds of things. They would have, you know, fur and, you know, fur hats and things made of ivory. Tiger bone wine was one that was really interesting. We would have, you know, shoes, like boots that had the caiman head still on them, and, you know, see these different things. And so it was a really great way to be able to confiscate, but then also give it new life. and, and help people understand that, like if you go on vacation and you see some of these things, you need to ask questions, right? Because, animals are generally, most cases, killed for these items. So it's, I think, helping people understand. I mean, the other piece is, right, if you're talking about specifically live animals, what I can tell you is we are AZA accredited, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is the highest standard in animal care. And we follow rules and regulations. And every 5 years, they come in to check on, how much have you, what have you done? What have you adjusted, right? Sometimes those policies and procedures are updated. The space requirements for certain animals has changed over the years, and we have to keep up with that. And so, a lot of animals now are actually born, at another zoo or aquarium. In many cases, they're not taken out of the wild. And then many of those other animals are rescued. So they were either orphaned or injured and cannot be released.
We have the
same. There's my soapbox.
Our living collection is mostly people who bought animals as pets and didn't realize a turtle could live for 50 or 100 years.
Yeah.
Needed somewhere to take it. And so we really try to reframe it as now we get to use them for education, particularly animals and bio artifacts. You can really talk about how you're building empathy for the natural world by showing people a piece of the natural world they wouldn't otherwise get to see. I see somebody post about beaver pelts. We use a beaver pelt too. And you can watch the shock on people's faces as they touch it one way, but then you brush your hand the other way and you see all the fluffy stuff underneath. And they're like, yes, you're like, this is a really interesting artifact. We know that people make coats out of it, but how does the beaver use its coat and things like that?
These are some great objects, by the way.
Yeah, I really want to point out the energy stick because I do think that sometimes toys often are forgotten. And as an early childhood educator, man, a kid can learn a lot from a toy. We have a lot of toy models of things that might be better for younger learners who are maybe not used to handling a delicate horseshoe crab exoskeleton, but can pick up a horseshoe crab toy and still interact with it and learn from it, learn the body parts, things like that. The energy stick is a wonderful little thing that can talk about circuits, and it's interactive and fun. It makes a fun light and noise.
Great. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but you should also have access to those if you have the Minty up.
With the last few minutes, some kids convinced I personally skinned the beaver. Yeah. With the last few minutes, we wanted to give you a little bit of time to think about if there's any lesson you're working on, any programming you're working on that currently doesn't have an object, and how you might be able to incorporate an object into it. Would that object enhance the learning? Is there even something as simple as like a toy you could use, a picture, things like that? If you have any questions, we'll hang out.
Would it be okay if I share something?
Yes, please.
We're currently developing a programming for Chinese New Year, but since the year of the snake, and we have live snakes in our collection. So we're going to be using them to kind of show kids our Eastern gardener snakes, which is our local snake species we have. And we actually decided recently to incorporate not just the animals, but I'm taking pictures of the habitat we have downstairs for them. So we can show kids like where we keep them and what they have, because the whole point of the lesson is about littlest neighbors and kind of the idea of them making their own home for these snakes.
Nice. I can easily see that branching out into even a conversation about like, what do animals need to survive? What is an animal going to find in its habitat, plus a cultural connection? When we work with the cultural objects, a lot of times we ask, especially children, to notice something familiar about it in terms of things like this. Animal imagery, right? You look at a lot of cultural artifacts and they're going to have a lot of animal imagery on them.
Got my fun one.
Oh, is that shark skin?
Yep.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Imagery.
Yep. Is anybody else working on anything they want to share about? Or any other questions?
Anyone have any cool events happening this weekend that they want to share out and invite people to?
Somebody asked, does anyone have any sorry, Steph, I just
No, go ahead. No, it's fine.
Does anyone have experience experimenting with the number of objects used in their programs? With object-based learning, is there a case of less is more, or the more the better?
I would say it depends on the number of people in your program.
And the age.
Yeah.
I think for little kids, the more the merrier.
Mm-hmm.
Giving them as many tactile things as possible to interact with really, I think, helps them. And
yeah. And if you've got a large group, they can share them more efficiently than if you just have a few items.
Somebody said at Falling Water, we have a lot of scaffolding now this year. And so we're going to incorporate the restoration and conservation practice into the tours. That's pretty cool.
Nice. Cool. Ooh, bees.
On a bee workshop. Yep.
I am fascinated by bees. I think anytime you can teach about bees in any way, shape, or form is awesome. We used to have a teaching hive that had the clear like plexi in the front. Oh.
And you could feel where the queen was. Did you ever do that?
No, how?
With a plexiglass hive, where you could put your hand to it, and where it's warmest is where the bees are buzzing the most, and usually deep inside there would be the queen. Yes.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Does anyone have any tips for it? Because whenever I have done object-based learning trainings, I always get some colleagues who I love dearly, but who just get very concerned about young kids doing, when I say inappropriate things, they're always worried they're gonna lick them or they're gonna break them. And there's this tendency to well, we can't give the touch objects to the littlest kids when really the touch objects should be for the littlest kids. Yes. I'm wondering if people have wisdom on how to push back against that.
I think your more delicate items, you can still let them touch but in a managed way, right? Whereas opposed to I can't put a horseshoe crab molt on a table for, just as a free for all because it's going to come back in tiny pieces, right? But you can definitely walk around with it, or have a teacher walk around with it, 2-finger touch, yeah.
But I also think if you're getting pushback from coworkers, modeling how you would handle that object with a small child is best. So we have our kids do our 2-finger touch. If they're going to hold something delicate, you put your hands underneath or you hold their hand on top, something like that. I think just showing your coworkers, this is how I plan on using this object with this kid goes a long way. I also don't think kids, even as young as 2 years old, they might have that intuition to put things in their mouth, but they do it very slowly. So there's plenty of time to push their arm away. No kid just I've never really seen a kid just pick something up and lick it, I think that you're absolutely right, though. Young kids learn best from touching an object. Or smelling it, or just being near it.
And we have a minute.
Yeah, in this last, there was another comment in the chat. Logistical note, do not pass around objects while you are talking. They won't be listening, just wondering when it will be their turn.
And that's true for grown-ups too.
Yes. And I think it's that there is a dynamic if you ever have a co-teacher or somebody else there and it's a large group, one could be passing out the object while the other is talking to the other half that is waiting and waiting. There's a good split there. Their last minute. Oh yeah, we're done.
I know. I was like, we gotta share. Thank you all for coming to our session. Hopefully there was something helpful. And again, feel free to, if you have programming that you want to share out, throw it in the chat. Always nice to see what other people are doing and invite, you know, because like the aquarium is going to start doing adult programming soon. So I'll be hawking those programs as soon as
just remember, objects can tell stories. I think that's our biggest message. So
yes.
Well, we hope this was informative.
Yeah, and I think, do we just all pop back into the main room? Is that?
I think so.
Okay.
We stay
all
here,
right.
Steph.
Oh, we stay. Oh, that makes sense. All right. All right. Bye, everyone.
Stop recording.